Well, hello everyone, and today you find me at the wheel of what I believe is potentially one of the most influential cars of a generation. A bold claim, I know. Want to find out more? Stick around. So the focus of today's video is the Citroen Saxo, loaned to me by my friend and long-term Citroen fan, Ben. Now Ben's actually quite well known in Citroen circles. It's quite a prominent figure in the Citroen Car Club, particularly in the northern section. The Citroen Car Club's quite a friendly group. I actually filmed at one of their events earlier this year at their northern rally. I will of course be leaving a link to that video at the end of this one. Do consider taking a look at the Citroen Car Club. I will leave some links in the video description as well. And if you do become a paid up member, there are some member benefits such as their Citroenian magazine. But anyway, on with today's review. So the Saxo was introduced in the latter half of the 1990s to replace the then ageing Citroen AX. Now it didn't escape many people that the Saxo bear more than a passing resemblance to its PSA sibling, the Peugeot 106. The Saxo was obviously heavily based on the 106, but the A and X in the Saxo is a little bit more than what got carried over from this car's predecessor. The Peugeot 106, which this car is based on, was in fact based on a Citroen AX. Of course, the Peugeot 106 had been on sale for quite a long time when the Saxo was released, and the Saxo was always one of the more budget options in the small car segment. Of course, there were always deals to be had throughout the car's life. Obviously, the pre-facelift versions, there were some couple of interesting special editions like the Spree, which could be had for as little as $6,695 with a year's free insurance. Quite an incentive for younger drivers with soaring insurance premiums. There was also another personal favourite of mine, the Open Scandal. Again, a fairly basic Saxo, but with some bright colours on the interior and a full-length fabric sunroof. Engines range from 1 litre to 1.6 litre petrol, and were XU engines carried over from other PSA cars, most notably the Peugeot 205. There was of course also a diesel engine, the 1.6, which continued throughout most of the Saxo's life. Things were moving quite fast towards the ends of the 1990s, and Citroen obviously had the work cut out to try and keep this car updated and current. So with the facelift, the range was slimmed at some point shortly after, ditching the 1 litre engine, although I'm told there were some facelifted cars with that engine, though whether you'd find one today I don't know. By 2001 there were 6 main trim levels available in the range. The first, which was the most basic car with grey plastic bumpers. The Forte added a little bit more. You got half colour coding and a few other niceties, such as a tilt and slide glass sunroof, which was actually standard equipment on all but the most basic model. Though all three door models of the car did have opening rear quarter lights, which certainly on a hotter day would have helped to keep this car cool. Move up to mid-spec Desire though got you quite a bit more full colour coding, and also things that today you would probably take for granted, like power assisted steering, electric front windows and remote control central locking. But the cars I really want to talk about today are the sportier half of the range, the cars with the infamous VT body kits. The most insurance-friendly version of these was the Furio. Actually, in pre-facelift form, this car would have been known as the West Coast. So the Furio had the 1.4 litre 8-valve 75 horsepower engine. And although no rocket ship, it still boasted some interesting features, such as the VT body kit, which gave you these wheel arch spats. You also got the boot spoiler, things like front fog lamps, and these racy white dials, which was a must-have in any hot hatch of the 1990s and early 2000s. The daddy of the range, of course, was the VTS model. The VTS boasted a 1.6 litre 16-valve engine with 120 horsepower. Now that might not seem a lot by today's standards, but when you bear in mind that these cars, even these more powerful 1.6 litre versions, still weighed only a shade over 900 kilos, which even by the standards of the day were considered very, very light indeed. Those cars could hit 127 miles per hour, and acceleration 0 to 60 would have been probably somewhere in the region of around 8, maybe 8.5 seconds. The problem though with the VTS, despite Citroen throwing in some features like ABS, a passenger airbag and lateral airbags for the front passengers, was still insurance. Hot hatches were always expensive to insure, even in the 1990s. This is where Citroen played a blinder, because the car that we're in today is the middle version, the VTR, and the car that probably most people actually aspired to. So what we've got instead is the same 1.6 litre block, but this time with an 8-valve head. In the pre-facelift cars, these produced around 90 horsepower, but in this 2001 model, this facelift, we've actually got a more powerful engine with around 100 horsepower. This meant that the car could now actually sprint to 60 miles per hour in around 9.5 seconds, which was quite respectable. Although because this car feels as light as it does actually feel like quite a bit quicker than that. Top speed now 120 miles per hour, which was certainly more than fast enough for any would-be boy racer of the era. Most Saxos got disc brakes up front and drums at the rear with servo assistance, but the VTR and VTS versions of the car got vented discs at the front and solid discs at the rear, although no ABS on the VTR model. Just as a side note, while we're talking about brakes, there were a bit of an issue with some of these PSA cars back in the day. I think the 206 might have been another one, where on right-hand drive versions they used a rod to connect the brake pedal to the brake servo. The downside of this is that if part of the trim under the dash was missing, it was actually possible for the passenger to activate the braking system. In terms of suspension and steering, was pretty much standard across the range. You got the usual McPherson struts with coilovers at the front and independent trailing arms at the rear, which were quite commonplace of cars of this size in the era, particularly with French cars. Now, as I did mention, these cars were quite cheap cars really back in the day. there was always built to a price. Now, plastics in here, bear in mind that this car is now over 20 years old. Everything actually feels really, really solid, but there is a lot of hard plastic. There are also quite a few rattles in the car, which again, I am told that even when they were new, these cars did tend to have a few rattles. A few squeaks and rattles though aren't the only things that remind you that this car is based on a vehicle from the 1980s, but this next one's probably more of a plus point. Visibility. It's absolutely excellent in here. All around you've got really, really deep glazing, and because this car is as tiny as it is, literally every corner you can just place this car so well, and would be great for any new driver, and that stands today just as much as it did back when this car was new. I mentioned earlier that this car is probably one of the most influential cars of a generation. Quite a bold statement, I know, but bear with me here. So, the reason I say this is because if you go back to the late 1990s and early 2000s, we were very much still in the max power era. Every Sunday night, retail parks and McDonalds across the country would have been packed out with many a young boy racer in their hatchback. Now, the car of choice for many of these would have been the Vauxhall Nova, as it's known in the UK, or the Corsa A in Europe. Now, a lot of these young drivers, certainly once they were going on to a second car, would have been looking for something a little bit newer and possibly something a little bit more powerful to migrate to once they had a few years no claims discount under the belt. Now, as mentioned, if you was under the age of 25, ensuring the VTS version of this car or some of the hot versions of other cars, certainly those with larger sort of 1.8 or 2 litre engines, they would have just been unattainable. So you would have been looking for something that's perhaps a 1.4 or a 1.6 litre. You would have wanted your body kit and all the other things that would have give you a bit of street cred. And this is where the VTR really came into its own. Although some people did progress from their Vauxhall Novas and Ford Fiestas into later Fiestas or into the Corsa B, quite a few actually went on to the Citroen Saxo. This car seemed to be way more popular than the car it replaced. In fact, I'd say it was probably even more popular with young drivers than the 106 was. It was an aspirational car. If you couldn't afford the VTR, then you'd have got a Furio. If you couldn't afford that, well, you might have even made do with one that didn't have the VT body kit. This car looked almost identical to its 16-valve VTS sibling. The only thing really to set them apart, well, externally, there was a little bit of badging. You had that VTS badge and a 16-valve badge on the rear quarter, which strangely enough seemed to make their way onto quite a few other cars of the era for whatever reason. And the wheels, you would have got a set of 15-inch alloys on the VTS model, and on the VTR these 14-inch Toulouse alloys with 185 section tyres, which actually give this car more than enough grip. And even though things like the gear lever throw and the pedals are all incredibly light, with the 185 tyres, the steering does feel weighty enough that you feel like you've got plenty of control over the car at speed, and it really does grip well and steers exceptionally well too. Thankfully it doesn't feel skittish like the DS3 that I had many years ago that used to tramline something terrible on its larger wheels and low profile tyres. If you was in your late teens or early 20s back in the day, it really was all things to all men. You certainly wouldn't have been going out and ensuring, or very few people would have been going out and buying things like a Golf GTI or a Subaru Impreza. Citroen also had quite a prominence in the day as well in rallying with things like with both the Saxo and in particular with the Works Zara cars. Now, I didn't opt for the Saxo myself. I actually progressed from my Renault 5 to its French cousin, the Mark II Renault Clio, which came out in the late 1990s. Now, the Clio, just like the Mark I before it, did actually set new standards in refinement for the class. And yeah, thinking back, the Clio probably did feel a more refined car than the Saxo, but then it was a new design at that time where the Saxo was obviously showing its age somewhat. You may have also considered a Volkswagen Polo, but again, you would have paid a bit of a premium. Base models probably wouldn't have come with a great deal of equipment. Volkswagen used to even charge you for things like radios on some of their cars, so whereas with a Saxo you would have got a 4-speaker radio in any model in the range, a cassette in the base model, and in everything above a base model would have come with a CD player. Again, Fiestas and Corsas were also a popular choice. Many driving schools use Corsas as well, so it was probably a natural progression to a lot of people. I suppose the biggest potential rival for this car would have actually been the 106. I know the VTS models of these, though they were quick to 60, it was noted when the cars was launched that they had quite a tall second gear, and if you didn't really redline the car through the gears, it could feel almost like it was bogging down when you were changing up. Not a problem here in this VTR model though. Another thing that made sense with the VTR, not only would it have been cheaper to buy and insure than the VTS, but fuel economy as well. Interestingly, when I was doing my research, I noted something I thought at first a little bit unusual. The combined fuel economy for this car, Citroen quotes it being a little over 42 mpg. The Furio, the 1.4 litre car, 2 miles per gallon better at 44. But if you had the 16 valve version of this 1.6 litre engine in your VTS, fuel economy was actually way down into the low 30s on combined cycle. Interesting when you consider that it's the same size capacity as this engine. What becomes more apparent is when you start looking at the torque figures. The torque figures are, I think, about 7 pound-foot more for the VTS, so there's hardly any difference at all, which isn't really a surprise when you consider the engine's capacity. What is a surprise though is that where that torque comes in at. 3,500 peak on this engine, well over 5,000 if you're on the VTS model. And that's probably where the real difference makes in terms of drivability and economy on this car. Now, I must say I've really enjoyed this car today. I'm very grateful to Ben for bringing this car out for me to have a drive in. I've actually been friends with Ben for quite a long time. I actually met him through the Institute of Advanced Motorists, which is a group that we've both proudly been members of for quite a number of years now. I will of course be leaving some links to the Institute of Advanced Motorists, or IAM, as it's better known, in the video description, along with those links to the Citroen Car Club, so do check those out. I'm also going to leave you some links somewhere, probably up here, to the Citroen Car Club meet video that I filmed, and probably to some other interesting videos that I think you will enjoy. Anyway, it's time is running on. I'm already a little bit later back than expected, and I've got to hand this car over to Ben. But maybe I can squeeze in time just for one more spin around the block. You've been watching Mark on Motoring. Thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you on the next one.